Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle's remarkable interjection on the topic of a likely Labour policy for the next election. Hoyle has argued with replacing the House of Lords with an elected chamber. Fairly stunning for a speaker to speak out against a policy, much less one that comes from a party that could form a government and carry it out. So what might the concerns be, and do they outweigh the problems we have now? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So in terms of what Labour eventually put into their manifesto regarding the House of Lords, we do not yet know. We know what Gordon's Brown proposal is, and there have been concerns raised. Starmer seems to be getting behind it. He was there at the launch. And as far as I can tell anyway, he's getting behind it. But nothing is ever certain until the manifesto is published. So what's the issue? Well, being honest, I had no problem with the unelected nature of the House of Lords up until recently. And if that sounds undemocratic, I don't think it is. The House of Lords doesn't decide policy. They don't actually decide anything in terms of the governance of the country. So why do they need to be elected? You wouldn't want your doctor to be elected or your local head teacher. You don't need clowns in those positions. You want the one with the best skills, chosen by people who understand the profession. Well, the same is true of the Lords, really. Their job is to scrutinise legislation from the House of Commons. So it helps if they've got experience doing that. So, of course, having senior lawyers or judges in the House of Lords, having former MPs in the House of Lords. That all makes sense, to make sure that there won't be any inadvertent consequences. But that is essentially it. They're basically glorified proofreaders. In theory, yes, they can block legislation that they don't like, but the government could then ram it through in the following session of Parliament, should that happen. And it's really spectacularly unlikely to happen because the Lords follow the convention of not being difficult with legislation that was proposed in the winning manifesto. In fact, they're rarely difficult with legislation that isn't in the manifesto. In recent years, people have looked to the Lords to stop some of the government's more autocratic measures, things that weren't even in the manifesto, but it hasn't happened. The House of Lords is not a chamber that is supposed to challenge the Commons, and it generally doesn't. But there is a problem. This is that the Lords, much like the monarch, do have certain powers in theory that they just don't exercise. But unlike the monarch, you can end up with members of the House of Lords who aren't that bothered about the continuation of their office. They prioritise their own ends. In the past few years, we have had some terrible appointments. We've had people appointed despite the strongest objections from our security services. So in other words, we're putting people into the House of Lords who are a national security threat. We've had people literally paying for their seats. The reputation of the House of Lords is being badly damaged and is certainly in need of reform, which brings me to Hoyle. So the Speaker in an interview has said, if people want to reform it, then do so, but do not have an elected second house. Now, this is a remarkable statement from someone who's supposed to be politically neutral. So neutral is the Speaker supposed to be that they have to leave their political party upon appointment. So Hoyle was a Labour MP. He's not anymore. But I'm not going to have a rant about him making this remarkable statement. I don't know whether he's overstepping his authority in making such a remark. I suspect that he is, because it doesn't sound very neutral to me. But I don't know that. And in the event, it doesn't matter to me so much. I don't mind discussing the pros and cons. The fear, I suppose, is that an elected House of Lords will feel they have the rights to block legislation from the Commons. Now, that could create an American-style stalemate where different parties control different arms of the government responsible for a thing, and then nothing gets done because they just block each other. But I would point out a couple of differences. First of all, we do not have a two-party system in the UK. Yes, we only have two parties who can credibly form the Westminster government, but that is the nature of first past the post. But we do have other parties who exist in significant numbers and are able to influence matters in Parliament. And what's more, if the system for electing the new House were more representative, which it really should be, then the duopoly of Labour and the Conservatives should not hold sway in the new chamber anyway. In fact, neither the Conservatives nor Labour have a majority in the House of Lords as it is right now. Now, admittedly, it could still cause problems, although it wouldn't be as polarised as American politics. It would still mean that no matter who formed the Westminster government, their opponents would form a majority collectively in the second chamber. Not necessarily a majority that would work together to block the government all the time, but it could do. But this brings me on to the second difference. So Gordon Brown's proposals didn't simply suggest making the House of Lords elected and then just do its own thing. In fact, the suggestion was that their role in scrutinising legislation was largely redundant if you just put in better scrutiny in the Commons. The proposal is that this second chamber has a different role in guarding the Constitution, which the proposals hint at codifying, and have the power to refer the government to the Supreme Court if they felt that they were threatening constitutional matters. That is not to say the new chamber wouldn't scrutinise the legislation from the Commons. I think Labour's plan is that it would still do that and amend where necessary. So it would still do the same jobs as now. But there's nothing to stop the constitutional arrangement whereby the Commons can force through whatever it wants through the second house, even if it takes a little longer, as is the case now. Doesn't actually have to change. If the argument is about the supremacy of the Commons, you just make that clear. After all, even in America, there is some demarcation of authority between, say, the two houses of Congress and the White House. It's just that a lot of legislation needs agreement from at least two parts of the government in the USA. There's no reason why that would have to be the case in the UK. You could enshrine the supremacy of the House of Commons when it comes to budgets and legislation into the Constitution and leave constitutional matters to the second chamber. So no reason at all not to have a second chamber elected if Brown's proposals are adopted fully. Do not see how it threatens the supremacy of the Commons, as Hoyle suggests, because it's not expected to have the power to block the Commons as such. Just suggest changes as it does now. That being said, I would definitely say that the process does need to be planned very carefully. Yes, if all you did was get the House of Commons, kick out the Lords, bring in elected members to do the same thing, yes, you could have problems. You know, an arm wrestle between the two houses, as Hoyle puts it, would not be helpful. But the issue is that right now the House of Lords is of no real value. The value it had has been eroded by the abuse it suffered at the hands of the Tories, particularly since Boris Johnson took over. Its credibility is shot. I think the credibility of the Commons is badly damaged as well, but the public at least know that they can act to change that at the next election. They can do nothing about the Lords. Besides, this talk of reform, reform it if you must, but don't make it elected. What reform then? What reform? He must know the problems. He will know the problems. What reform can do that? The point I make is that the members of any legislative chamber are either elected or appointed. Granted, they used to be hereditary, but that's been essentially knocked on the head by the last Labour government. So now, if you appoint them, then inevitably it becomes possible for those who are appointing them to corruptly accept money in order to make the appointments. It also becomes possible for friends, allies and assorted toadies to be appointed for selfish political reasons or as a reward for favours done. You know, favours such as keeping quiet to avoid a scandal, for example. How do you reform the House to avoid this? Because it doesn't matter whether the appointments are made by individual politicians, cross-party groups, panels of non-political officials. The same corruption exists in all cases. Like, even if the best I could come up with to try and avoid some of it is if appointments had to be agreed by a cross-party group, like a select committee, and it had to be unanimous, say, you would get situations where, well, they would block appointments unless you got these ones. It'd be like, well, we'll let your pick in if you let ours in. And there'll be a whole load of grubby deals done. Politics is and always has been a case of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Sure, getting people to pick politicians is a crap system, especially in a society where the media is little better than a propaganda tool for the interests of a wealthy elite, and hardly any bugger has critical thinking skills. But it at least reduces the level of piss-taking when political patronage makes those appointments. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.